All right, welcome everybody to our first edition of Principal Soup. I'm Jamal Crook.
I'm Zach Schottler.
So today we are talking about the human side of leadership. Zach, how you feel about that?
The human side of leadership, that's what leadership is. There is no leadership without human beings. And as you talked about a lot, Jamal, human beings, we're all complex. We all have our intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And when you're in a leadership position, it's all about knowing, what buttons to push to get the desired results to help the team.
All right, so in today's episode, we're going to go over a few things dealing with the human side of leadership. We're going to talk about empathy, vulnerability, and staying authentic to be more effective as leaders. I think sometimes when we as leaders, we send a strong representative and we feel like we have to be this version of ourselves. Sometimes that's not necessarily human. And I think for me, when I'm learning over these last 7 years of leadership, is we are more than what I call our employee ID numbers. We're people at our core. And I think one fundamental thing for me is treating people like people in addition to myself.
I think that second part is the part that's most important, treating yourself like a person.
Right.
Because if you end up in a leadership role, you are probably highly motivated. You probably want to see the team and yourself succeed. And we tend to not be very forgiving of ourselves. So it's hard to treat ourselves like human beings. Oftentimes in leadership roles, we're very quick to forgive somebody else or pat them on the back and say, hey, we'll get them next time. We can go home cranky, anxiety riddled, depressed because we don't feel like we handled the situation the best, or we don't feel like we were the best. And what tends to happen is you can only do that for so long. If you're not a good friend with the person in the mirror, you'll eventually burn out. You'll eventually become short with people. So I think the key to leadership, like you talked about, is having empathy, but having empathy with yourself and treating yourself like a person.
So just what you just said prompted this thought. I remember making the transition from assistant principal to principal, and I got those keys to the building, and I was on my way down from the downtown building, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking like, man, I'm the principal at this school. We got over 1,000 students, 100 employees, and all of a sudden it just hit me in the middle of the night. Like, I am responsible for all of these things. A lot of times we feel like in leadership roles, we work a 9 to 5 and these are my working hours. But really, we are called to run the show, make sure that the show consistently goes on through hurricanes, through all those different things. Sometimes we put like this pressure on ourselves that sometimes it's unnecessary.
Yeah, oftentimes we have higher expectations for ourselves than anybody on our team, can have for us. And we feel like the microscope is always on us. But the reality of the situation is, while we make some big decisions, while the jobs come with criticism, most people are focused on, their own tasks, their own personal problems, their own personal successes. So people aren't watching us quite as much as we think. And everybody's favorite topics themselves for the most part. And yeah, we're part of everybody's story as leaders, but it's not all about us, never all about us. And sometimes if we become so egocentric thinking it is all about us, it will lead to a nervous breakdown because we think everything that we do, people are watching and criticizing and analyzing, from the way that we open our door in the morning to how we eat our sandwich. But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes, most of the time, those are narratives in our own heads.
Yeah. So let's jump right into some of the key topics, right? So what does it mean to balance authority and empathy from your perspective?
Well, when you're in a leadership role, you do have the authority to make a lot of decisions. And we all have our policy manuals. A lot of places have their progressive discipline policies. So if we want to be very black and white, if we want to be very sterile, a lot of this stuff's spelled out for us. we could just go buy the book. And sometimes the criticism will be, well, just go buy the book. But no human being, we talked about human beings, really wants to be treated by the book. Most human beings want to be treated based on the situation that is occurring in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in a leadership role, you have the authority to do a lot of different things. Whether it is transfer somebody to a new position, whether it is some type of discipline, write up, suspension, what have you. But having empathy is looking at the individual person, understanding their narrative, their story, what's going on. Did they make a simple mistake? Do they have some personal things going on in their lives? Is this something that we can coach them through? Is this something where they just need somebody to simply sit and listen? And then making the decision on how we're going to move them forward to be the most successful version of themselves. And sometimes that is going strictly by the book. Sometimes it's sitting down and taking time to listen to see what's going on with them, understanding what their track record is. What is their past performance? Are they somebody that is diligent and dedicated to the team, dedicated to the organization? They consistently make good decisions. In this one instance, maybe they showed up late all week. Do they have a sick baby at home? Do they have a parent that is going through a long-term illness that they have to take care of in the morning? We don't know. But if we take the time to ask, we can have empathy and we can work with them to try to help, instead of saying, hey, you've been late 3 times this week, here's your letter of reprimand. We have the authority to do that because there's no technical excuse for being late. But do we have the empathy to understand what's going on, with them? I'll give you an example. For me, when I was a principal, this was probably a decade ago, I broke my foot at work. Yeah. You don't really think of being a principal as a high impact job, but the reward for the students was to play kickball with the principal. So we're playing kickball. I'm the steady pitcher, but I like to keep the games close.
Mm-hmm.
Game's getting a little out of hand. I start trying to make some plays, Jamal. Start to make some plays, at least in my own mind. I try to catch a ball over the shoulder, Willie Mays style. Now the gym was built like in the 40s or 50s. So my excuse is that the floor was a little bit wavy. I twist my foot. I had never broken a bone before. Immediately felt that feeling where they say you want to throw up. So I'm down on one knee. The kids are only like in 2nd grade, so they're not laughing. If this was high school, they'd have been laughing at me. I'm surrounded by all these little kids asking if I'm okay. Then their next question is, are we going to be able to finish the game? And, as a prideful person, I know I'm in a lot of pain, but I tell them we're going to finish the game. We finished that game of kickball. I take my shoe off. It looked like somebody cut a tennis ball in half and laid it across the top of my foot. But I've still got 3 more kickball games to play. So I play them all. I finish the games. I drive myself to the emergency room. I have a broken 5th metatarsal, whatever. And, they give me a boot. They tell me they can do surgery on it if I wanted to get back to the playing field quicker. But obviously, since I broke my foot playing kickball with 2nd graders, I am no longer an athlete at this point. So the boot's going to be fine. And I have to go back and get it checked on for a few weeks. I go to physical therapy. You want to guess how many days of work I missed, Jamal?
How many?
0.
Wow.
So I have a physical therapy appointment. I think I'm only going to be gone maybe like an hour and a half. I call my supervisor at the time and I'm like, hey, I've got a doctor's appointment. It's just right down the road. Only going to be gone an hour. I just wanted to check with you to make sure it was okay just to leave and come back. And my supervisor at the time said, if you can get back within the hour, you don't have to put in for a day. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, if you think you can get back within the hour, you don't have to put in for a day. And I get it. If we want to go by the book, I was leaving to get my foot checked out, but I did hurt my foot at work and I didn't miss any time. I felt like that was kind of a kick to the shin. You know what I mean? I heard it at work. I don't miss any time. And when I called to say, hey, I'm going to run to the doctor and be right back. Hey, if you can't get back within the hour, you're going to have to put in a day sick. I get it. They have the authority to do that. They have the right to do that. I'm not disputing any of that. But we talk about empathy. I think empathy would be like, hey, Zach, we appreciate you calling. Um, we really appreciate you didn't miss any time. Just go ahead and go and come back. No big deal. And just that little phrase of if you can get back within the hour, you don't have to put in for a sick day. It's like it's demotivating.
Right. So along those same lines, like I have this philosophy. I tell people all the time, I can lead you by love or I can lead you by law. And I think as I've grown, love to me really means empathy, right? And I have a mantra on the difference between really empathy and sympathy, because sometimes we use those words interchangeably. And empathy doesn't necessarily is not sympathy. Sympathy means you poor thing, I feel sorry for you. And I'm doing nothing to support, you getting better or you improving. Empathy means like I'm going to partner with you and whatever it takes to ensure that you are successful. Um, and then I think it goes back to balancing that authority. I remember for me, there was one significant time, and it was doing bus duty, where I kind of cultivated this mindset. So I used to be real type A, and some people say I'm real type A now,
You
but I
used to be,
used to be
used
real
to be.
type A. I'm a lowercase a, right? But I used to be real type A about the buses lining up in a certain slot. Everyone had their slot. So the kids knew if they didn't see the bus in their slot, you got 1,800 kids trying to get on the bus. So like those little details mattered. So one day we had a pipe bust inside of our at the school, and it was
Speaking
leaking.
of fight, bust on cue.
Right. It was leaking sewage onto the road, right? Now it wasn't like it wasn't heavy sewage in my opinion. It was just the water of the sewage, right? And the bus driver pulled into a different slot. So I go out there and I'm like, hey, you moved my keys. I need you to move back now. And he was like, no, I'm not moving back. So we had this exchange, and I walk away. And then before I walk away, he was like, hey man, let me ask you something. He says, if you were picking up kids in your car, he says, would you want them to walk through poo poo water and get in the car and wipe their feet all on the bus? And I mean, wipe their feet all on your floor, and you have to smell that while you're driving them somewhere? And in my mind that day, it was still, no, you need to park in the right slot so the kids have the consistency and all these different things. And I missed the point, right? So I thought about it at night, and I thought about what had happened. All the kids got on the bus, like the goal was met. We moved it. To him, that meant so much for him to be able to move his bus and still do the job, but not have to deal with the poo poo water, as he described. And it was that day I realized, like, man, as long as I'm still getting the job done, I'm allowed to use discretion to work with people where they are. So, metaphorically, sometimes let me back up. I went back and apologized to him, and I said, hey, you have a very valid point. I wouldn't want someone in getting in my car after they just walk through poo poo water. I'd probably make them take their shoes off and put it in the bag, or something. And so when we had that exchange, he was like, see, now you understand where I'm coming from. And we mended that relationship, and we were good, and all the kids got home safely every day thereafter. But it really put me in the state, do I really understand where the people that I lead, where are they coming from? Like what's their motives, what's their mindset, and can I support them in that? I could have used my authority, like you said, to say, no, here's the book, here's where you line up at. I could have probably written them up or made a big stink about it, because the rules say you park wherever I need you to park. But once I understood where he was coming from, I was committed to partnering with him to make sure that all of the little pieces work for both of us so we can still get the job done. And I think sometimes, the balance between authority and empathy comes from the point of, what is the job, right? What are we trying to get done? And how do we work together as people to get those things done? People get sick, people get tired, people go through a range of emotions. And it's a lot of times we say we dismiss that portion of ourselves and we say leave that at the door, but we really have to work through the human experience. I think empathy, having empathy, understanding where people are coming from, and treating people how you would want to be treated, but in the sense of treating them how they would want to be treated through that movement or that system or whatever it is that we're working on together at any given time.
Yeah, sympathy is sometimes easier and it's not always as productive. I mean, sometimes all of us want sympathy. We just want somebody to kind of feel sorry for our situation. But many times, we want the empathy, because empathy means somebody took the time to listen and understand. We don't necessarily want somebody to feel sorry for us. We want somebody to see the world through our eyes and understand why we feel the way that we do. And it doesn't mean feeling sorry for us. It just means looking at what we're dealing with through our own eyes, walking a mile in our shoes. And I think that can make all the difference. I mean, there's a lot of students that have a lot of struggles. They don't want you to feel sorry for them. They just want you to understand why school's so challenging, or why not shutting down is hard for them. Because if you grow up in a two-parent household, middle income family, it's always, hey, you can push through this. But it's easy to push through it when you have support. Harder to push through it when there is no support. And oftentimes it's the antithesis of support, where people are actually pushing you down.
Right. So let me ask you this question. Why do some leaders lean heavily on authority and others struggle with being too nice?
I think a lot of it depends on your personality. You're a sports fan. I know you played Division I college football. You'll hear the term players coach versus coach, authoritarian coach. And depending on the situation, that can be a compliment or it can be a backhanded compliment. Oh, that guy's just a players coach. Typically that means he doesn't know the X's and O's, or the players run roughshod over him. But the reality is all good coaches are players coaches because they understand their players. I think it's personality driven. I also think there's a level of courageousness involved with it, because if we talk about authority, a lot of our authority when we ascend to a leadership position is spelled out for us. Hey, here's your job description. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. It goes a lot into your lead by love or lead by law. So if I want to go into the office and I want to go straight on the policy manual, if I want to go straight on the employee handbook, I can make decisions pretty clear cut. And sometimes they're necessary to be pretty clear cut. However, if I want to lead as a human, if I want to try to understand where people are coming from, if I want to understand situations, not everything is A happened and then B is the result. It's just not that clear cut. Now, it could be that clear cut, but I think you tend to, over time, lose your team if you don't treat them as individuals.
Yeah. So, and to that same point, I think a lot of times we lean heavily on authority or we're too nice because either, like you said, it comes to courage. You have to have the courage to be disliked. And I think making sound decisions for the purpose of the organization is so important, and anchoring on those things. And I think sometimes we get in the realm of authority and accountability as if those two things are punishment. And then we say, well, we're not allowed to be nice to people because I have to create this facade of a thing.
Here's what I think happens, and I have a little bit of a theory on this. Mm-hmm. So if you look at like the FBI or Homeland Security, they don't necessarily get credit for the attacks they stop, right? Mm-hmm. They only get criticism for the things that happen. So I think what I struggle with and people struggle with is, okay, Jamal messed up. We didn't suspend him with pay. We didn't take the steps towards removing him, but I meet with you. We have a great talk. I find out more about your family. I find out why your behavior may have been such. we shake hands, we strengthen our relationship, and for the next 20 years at our district, you have an amazing career. And a lot of that could be attributed to the fact I tried to understand you, you tried to understand me. Now we have a great working relationship. Leaders never get credit for that.
No.
What we get criticism for is I make the decision not to write you up. I think I have a good conversation with you. We shake hands, and then 3 months later, you do the same thing.
Right.
And then somebody comes and says, hey, that should be step 2 on removing Jamal. Well, the first time I didn't because, Zach, you messed up. Look, you're too nice. You don't take care of business. This is why you're a pushover. That's what gets the spotlight shown on it. And it doesn't mean from that point forward, you can't go through the formal steps. But we don't get credit as leaders for those conversations that go well, that we truly understand that Jamal has a sick mom that he takes care of in the morning. And that's why he's late sometimes. So we give him some grace there. Jamal does great. We don't get concerned with Jamal. He's an A+ employee. Now, the people that we try to work with that way, and it goes south, sometimes south, like really south, that's when leaders get criticized for being soft or too nice or not wanting confrontation. So there's a fine line. It's never usually one thing or the other thing. Sometimes it's in the middle, and people that aren't behind the curtain don't understand what we're trying to do, or even if it's effective.
Right. And to that point, that's where I was going to. It's okay for us to cultivate positive relationships with people. And I think if you lean heavily on authority, you haven't taken enough time to build relationships with people where you are. And I think also if you're too nice, you struggle with, I guess you're the people pleasing, or you don't really have the courage to be disliked in those moments. And I think at times, I know in schools, we always say we have to do what's best for students. Sometimes doing what's best for students is also doing what's best for adults. Because I think as a leader, and coming from, we all have to teach. We all have to cut our teeth in the classroom before we become principals and superintendents. And I think for us, the job never changes, just the audience does. We're always in a function of teaching to some degree. And I think, with our students, when we were in the classroom, we held them accountable, we gave them tough love and all those different things. Well, it really doesn't change when you become a leader or you get to that next level. You still have to show love and be accountable and all those different things. But I think the foundation of all those things is cultivating appropriate relationships at the deepest level you possibly can with the individuals that you are called to lead. And I think once you do that, you have a greater understanding, and then it does create empathy, because I know where you're coming from. I tell some people, when, Miss Yaconelli is my fictitious teacher that I always bring up, right? So Miss Yaconelli, I've been talking about Miss Yaconelli for years. But, don't come to me and say, well, why does Miss Yaconelli get to park up front and I got to park in the teacher's parking lot? And I always say to people something to the effect, you don't have the same circumstances as Miss Yaconelli. If you knew why she was parking up front, you wouldn't want to park up front. You don't know that Miss Yaconelli, like you said, has a mother that's in hospice, and she needs to leave every day 5 minutes before the bell rings, or 10 minutes before dismissal. And we allow that reasonable accommodation to support Miss Yaconelli through that circumstance or that time.
And too nice and too harsh is very subjective. I mean, we talk about treating people how they want to be treated. We don't always know. I mean, my mom always tells me that not everybody signed up to be me, which is very accurate. I mean, I think back to one of my jobs. You know how when you're hired as a principal, you give your opening address. So I'm getting ready to give my opening address, and I look around the room, and I think everybody's there because it's my first day. I don't know if everybody's there. I'm about 5 minutes in, and 5 minutes into my opening address, a few staff members trickle in, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not good. It's my first day on the job. I have a few people that seem pretty comfortable showing up 10 minutes into my kickoff address. How do I handle this, and how do I build the team and show people this isn't acceptable? And I said, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm just going to stand up here and say, like, you and you, after this is over, I'd like you to come to my office so we can have a discussion. So I rolled the dice. I did that. They came to my office. We had a good discussion. I shaped it like this, like, hey, I need you folks on my team. Showing up late kind of gives the impression that that's okay. And if I let you get away with it, I'm saying everybody has to get away with it. Can we work together and not have that happen? And everybody in that room was very open. They ended up being some of the best teammates that I could have in that position. And nobody on the outside really knew, because it just wasn't discussed. So in that situation, it didn't come across, I think, harsh at all. It actually fostered a stronger team. There's been other situations where I'm not planning on giving anybody a formal write-up. I'm not planning on even recording, documenting the incident. I just want to say, hey, Jamal, can we do a little bit better? And the talk lasts 30 seconds. And then the next thing that I know, it's, how can I be so mean to that person? And so that's where the real challenge comes in, because not everybody interprets things the same way. And that's on us as leaders to try to navigate that, to where that first story I told was kind of harsh. It was my first day. Lights just went out. And that was kind of a risk, but that strengthened the relationship. I've had other instances where I think, hey, I'm going to be super nice here. I'm going to be super empathetic. I'm going to be kind and considerate and understanding. A write-up's not even on the table. I just want to bring you in to tell you, like, hey, can we do a little bit better? And it turns into like mass chaos. So there's never really a way to know unless we know the people that we're working with and how they're going to interpret those things. So I've made dozens of mistakes in misinterpreting how people are going to handle things. And I think that's just the nature of it. But leadership's a two-way dance. And we talk about authority. Whether you're the coach, the superintendent, the principal, you do have the authority to deliver your message as long as it's professional in what way you see fit. The two-way dance part is coaching your team to understand that coaching and feedback and consequences for messing up are part of it. I think sometimes we create an environment where consequences are never a part of it, and things get so out of hand that when we do have to administer consequences, even if the consequence is like, hey, I need you to be better, that is considered harsh because nobody ever gets talked to, because the leader wants to avoid any type of conflict. So it's very nuanced. It's very hard. I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I know all the answers, because I don't, because it's super hard.
And none of us do, really. And I think that is, this reason why we're talking about it, because you have to operate as a person, and there's no one specific situation that's going to be the same. And you can say this to this person the same way that you said it to that person. The success you have with one person is not the same success. This is really what it means to be human. So switching gears here, let's talk about being vulnerable, right? I call vulnerability adequate transparency, right? And I think in different settings, as a leader, I think there are two positions in every school district, and they're equivalents in other industries. I just don't know what they are, maybe the CEO, but there are two positions in every school district that are the most isolated. That's the superintendent position, and that's the principalship. Those are microcosms of the same type of thing. And I think sometimes where we want to tell the whole truth all the time, it's the way that information gets out, how we conduct ourselves with some of those things. And it could lead to us appearing as weak or trying to be controlling. So let's talk about the vulnerability from the standpoint of, what does it mean to overcome the fear of appearing to be weak as a leader versus someone who's just power hungry, and shape that in the realm of vulnerability?
One of the best definitions I think I've read about vulnerability was Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code. shared vulnerability is one of the three keys to establishing a strong culture. And vulnerability isn't crying on each other's shoulders. Vulnerability is I'm comfortable enough to know my strengths and share those to help other people. I'm also comfortable enough to know my deficiencies and where I need other people's expertise to help me. And I think that's a struggle in organizations. One of our core values is to be coachable and willing to coach. And that hits on vulnerability for us because to be coachable, we have to know where we need help. And to be coachable, we have to actually ask for help because people might not know if we hide our deficiencies. And being willing to coach others is also part of vulnerability because if you know that you're really good at something and you're a good teammate, you have to be willing to share that to help other people. I think too often, because of a lack of confidence, we are good at things, but we're never going to let on to others that we're good at things because we don't want to appear less than. You know, I think the key word is we think we're good at things, but if we never share it with others, we don't have to really know for sure if we are. So vulnerability, being open where you need help and being willing to ask, and also knowing where you're strong and knowing where to give support. I think another huge piece of vulnerability is showing yourself as a human being. When I was an assistant principal, I always felt like if people knew me outside of the school as Zach, it was to my benefit. If they only saw me as Mr. Shuttler, it was very easy to be mean and short and angry at a guy wearing a shirt and tie. It was hard to be angry at Zach, who was 27 years old at the time, just learning to be an assistant principal. I think fast forward to 2025, it's very easy to be angry at a guy named Dr. Shuttler wearing a suit. It's hard to be angry at a guy named Zach who's in his mid 40s, who has two kids in middle school, and he's just trying to figure it out too. He doesn't have all the answers. So I think knowing where the line is to where we're not oversharing. Nobody wants an overshare, but we all want to believe that our leaders aren't robots and aren't so sterilized that everything is A, B, C, D. It's nice to know that sometimes our leaders have a hard time getting up when the alarm clock goes off. Yeah. It's nice to know that our leaders sometimes don't know how to respond to their teenage daughter when she says she doesn't want to hang around them anymore. It's nice to know sometimes that our leaders coach their sons, and sometimes they're not the best coaches for their sons. I wrote an article recently about my journey as a dad and how I can be too tough on my son and daughter in relation to sports and how it's not effective. I think sharing those things is important because if we feel like we're in a glass house and that we can't mess up, it's hard to coach anybody because we don't want to throw that stone that breaks that fake facade. So being a leader is knowing where the line is, where the professional line is, but also knowing to share enough to show that we bleed like anybody else.
Yeah. So I think to that point, sometimes we inspire people more by sharing our failures and how we overcome those things as opposed to sharing our highlight reels, so to speak. And I think that to a lot of your point, leaving room for improvement, I feel like is a key to being vulnerable. And I don't personally view vulnerability as a weakness as much as it is a strength, because it communicates, like you said, like I don't have it all together and I'm trying to figure this thing out as well. But it also is powerful because people don't freak out when you make an adjustment to a policy or something that benefits the group. I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as leaders. I know in my first principalship, I did, to come up with the perfect plan the first time, and we can't deviate from that plan. And I felt like if the plan was, if I had to deviate at all, like I wasn't a good leader and I messed up, and the adjustments that we needed to make, I just couldn't make it. I couldn't picture looking people in the face and say, hey, I got it wrong. But then when I realized, with all my documents, I started slapping draft on all those jokers, and it's always a working draft. Then we can make tweaks and adjust And then we can use data, qualitative and quantitative, to continue to adjust to make small little improvements. And then you look at all the research on the power of small little improvements. So it's leading from a place to, I'm not perfect. I'm not going to produce anything that's perfect. But I remember 2 years, about a year and a half ago, we started, our PLC work. And I mean, I can be extremely convincing. And I had some people on the team that were like, hey, I think we need to go in a different direction. And I was like, no, this is it. This is the cat's meow. We're going to focus on this. I went to a couple of trainings, couple of conferences. I started really looking at what it is that we did. And I was like, man, I've been leading people in the wrong direction. So what I did was I got in front of the staff. We meet every Tuesday. I got in front of the staff. I was like, hey, y'all, did some learning. I've been, first of all, I've been asking y'all to do too much. And I want to say I appreciate the fact that you all have followed my leadership and have done more than probably what's required in this moment. Two, I realize that I've been leading us in the wrong direction as it relates to our focus. So, here is what we need to focus on moving forward. And everybody was like, yeah, finally, you finally did it, right? And that day was one of those days where, you got almost a standing ovation. They was clapping, like giving me little golf claps, like finally he gets it. But I apologized, and then I corrected the course. And I felt like in moments like that, in that moment, we became closer as a staff. And it wasn't something that they held against me. They were glad that I finally got to that place of understanding, so we can start doing the work that mattered the most. And also it streamlined the work for them. So I think as leaders, the power of vulnerability is it gives you the power to adjust. That doesn't mean, vent and tell all your magical stories and all these different things, and don't use it as a means to get people to feel sorry for you. Oh, I have it so hard as a leader. This is so tough. You don't understand all the pressures. I'm so busy. I'm so this. Because your job, and here's a pet peeve of mine. When people come to me and say, I know you're busy, but can I get a moment of your time? And I'm constantly training my people. My job is to support you and to connect with you while I'm here. I'm never too busy for you unless my door is closed. But very seldom, if my door is open, it's open because I want to connect with you. I'm not too busy for you. There's nothing more important than me spending this time with you right now, making sure that you have what you need. So, but going back, vulnerability gives us the opportunity to consistently adjust and to make improvements.
Yeah, and vulnerability is getting to know your folks and then finding out what moves the needle for them. Because the same thing that moves the needle for you and I might not move for somebody else. You and I, we have kids, we both have a young family. So a connection for you and I to share vulnerability is talk about like the struggles we both have with our daughter, or how stubborn your sons and my son can be. How do we handle these things? How do we be good dads? That's a natural connection for you and I. But it's not a natural connection for a new teacher that we hire that's 22 years old and not married and doesn't have any kids. So what moves the needle for them? Oh, they enjoy exercise. So do I. So we can talk about weightlifting or training for a half marathon. And then, there's a teacher over here that doesn't have kids and doesn't necessarily enjoy exercise, but they love dogs. I have a dog. Let's be a little bit vulnerable talking about, hey, how do you best potty train your dog? Because this is my first dog. I don't know how to. So it doesn't matter that I'm superintendent. I don't know how to raise a puppy, but I know you do. And that shows our vulnerability, and it also allows to build some connection.
Right. So let's move into some practical tips for leading with the heart. Let's start with empathy in action. What are some ways that we can actively listen and respond to the needs of our staff?
You can't give something you yourself don't possess. And this is something that I'm constantly working on. It was a struggle of mine immensely my entire life. You have to be your own best friend. And one activity I love to use when I work with students or adults is I ask them to reflect on the last time that they made a mistake, like a big mistake in their mind. Give them some time to think about that mistake was. And then I ask them to turn to the person to their right and use the same language they called themselves to the other person. I've done this dozens of times. Nobody repeats what they say about themselves to the other person. And working on being kind to you, which is still a major struggle of mine. I can be my biggest critic, usually am. If you can't be kind to yourself, it ends up over the course of time and wear and tear increasingly hard to be kind and understanding of other people. So if I had to give one practical tip, work on being a friend to you, work on being less critical about yourself. If you can be kind to yourself over time, you're going to be more understanding and helpful to other people.
Right. And I think to that point as well, I think there's a power in connecting with other people at your same level. We call them PLCs, whatever the case is. But I think because the role can be so isolating, when I talk to you, or when I talk to, someone really at my same level, it gives me a sense of understanding that I wouldn't have. To me, it normalizes what I'm experiencing. And as much as we can normalize what we experience, it grounds us. So if I know that you're dealing with a vaping problem at your school and I'm dealing with a vaping problem in my school, and I hear what you're doing to it. I'm doing the same thing. I'm having the same results. It makes me feel like I'm not the only person in the world that is dealing with this circumstance. And it makes me almost feel a little more effective, because if someone who has 20 years of experience in administration is dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing with, it helps me be the best version of myself. I was talking with a principal in another state this week, actually. It was Sunday, right? And we were talking about flex time. And we were talking about going through and making sure that time of the day is, we hold people accountable, we go through, we see, all of the things. But the thing that stuck out to me is the same qualitative data that I have in my school that was making me feel inadequate is the same qualitative data that she has at her school, and she's been doing it for a lot longer than I have. So, you start to normalize, and once you normalize, it puts you in a position to where you can start to think through things, and it makes you a better leader with the people around you, because you don't feel as inadequate as you would if you were the only person dealing with that circumstance.
Human beings are human beings. I mean, if we go back and we read stories in the Bible, the same thing that befell kings in the Old Testament is the same thing that befalls politicians today. So if you think you have a unique problem, you probably haven't done a whole lot of reading on that problem, and you probably haven't connected with very many people. Human beings are human beings. Problems in one school tend to be problems in another school, especially with similar, socioeconomic statuses or locations. So in my area, there's 7 other school districts. So for me to feel like I'm isolated and that these other schools aren't having similar struggles, that's on me for self-isolating. I can pick up the phone and I can ask 6 other superintendents, how are you handling this situation? Do you have any advice or suggestions? And they might not have the answer for me, but at the very least, it normalizes the problem so that I realize it's not necessarily unique to where I'm at.
Right. And I think another thing too is being present and really enjoying the moment. And I tell people every year, there will never be another time like this in our lives. It'll never be this easy, and it'll never be this hard. Where we have this perfect blend of right now, and we have to focus on the right now. One of the things that I do every month to make sure that I'm connecting with staff is I just visit their classrooms on their conference period and just say, hey, how's it going? How how are you? Or wherever they are, I'll go sit with like the different labor groups, the lunch ladies, our ELL department, and just, hey, how's the family? What's going on? And I'm always surprised to a sense of the things that they're willing to share when you just as a leader, you're willing to sit down and listen to where they're coming from. And it also helps me understand when I'm making a decision, I'll say, well, if I have it at this time or this event at this time, that's going to impact this person, or it's going to impact this person positively. Or I know this teacher is looking for a summer job. Let me call one of my colleagues that has a summer school that fits the need because she lives on that side of town. It allows me to help people at a higher level once I understand who they are.
Yep.
So in closing, as we kind of wrap this thing up, what's one way this week our listeners can show more empathy without compromising their expectations?
I think genuinely asking people how they're doing. And when you ask that question, it's not a throwaway line. If you ask it, be prepared to listen to the answer and ask some follow-up questions. And it's mentally taxing, but I think just if you can do it one time a day to somebody that you don't normally talk to, hey, how are you doing? And they say fine. No, seriously, like, I got time. How you doing? And I think that builds a sense of connection. And if we think back to our lives, the people that had time for us, we end up holding in very high regard.
And I think as we close, I think there's one thing to remember: leadership isn't about perfection; it's really about connection. That's all we have today, y'all. Have a great one.